Hello, you're watching PC Jack. I've been really excited to finally share my thoughts on the Steam Deck. I spent a lot of time acclimating to this device and getting used to it, and I'm really excited to finally share my thoughts on it. Now, if you're a regular on the channel, you've probably already seen my Steam Deck unboxing, and you're wondering why it's taking me so long to actually do my review. Well, there's a few reasons why. Firstly, since the Steam Deck actually launched in February, I was kind of already late to the party and I didn't see much of a rush to get my review out very quick. Secondly, I didn't want to publish anything too immediately while I was still within the honeymoon period of using the device. The first couple of weeks is when you basically can't put the device down, and it's the best thing you've ever used. But over time, that feeling subsides, and then your true feelings start to become more apparent, which is the kind of mindset I wanted to be in before I actually published my final thoughts on it. At that point, that's when you discover all the things you like about it, the quirks, how it fits into your daily life, and most importantly, your true thoughts on it as a whole. So 2 months on, I feel like I've found the way that the Steam Deck fits into my daily life, and I have a lot of interesting thoughts I'd like to share on it. Now, there's probably very little at this point that you haven't heard about the Steam Deck already, but in today's video, what I want to share with you guys is how it's been for me, and how it's been for some of the games I played the most on it, and some of the things I loved about the device the most. So to begin, let's go over my thoughts on the design. My expectations before receiving the Steam Deck was that it was going to be pretty big, but after using it for a while, I can say that the size is absolutely perfect. Given the way Valve has kept the internals distant from where you would hold the device, it's very important for both comfort and ergonomics, but also to keep your hands from getting hot, as the center of deck does get pretty warm to the touch. Now, that is intended, as the back is designed to function as a heatsink, so you're not actually going to scald yourself while holding the grips. Touching upon ergonomics a little more though, the actual thumb grips are super comfortable. About a week or two ago, I actually picked up my Nintendo Switch for the first time in a while, and it felt so flat and uncomfortable compared to the Steam Deck. It didn't control anywhere near as much as the Steam Deck, which with its design makes it really comfortable to use for even 2 hours at a time compared to the Nintendo Switch. One thing I really don't care about though are these back bumpers. I haven't found a single game of mine that uses these to great effect, besides Valve's Aperture Desk Job, which is designed specifically for the Steam Deck in mind. Besides that though, I mostly just press them by mistake when I'm in games, and just forget that they're there anyway. Maybe one day I'll find a game that actually makes better use of them, for now though, they're not my thing. Now, taking a look at the rest of the controls, the buttons feel great to press, and they're really easy to locate while focusing on the screen. The trigger buttons feel great and honestly are pretty comparable to a high-end controller from either PlayStation or Xbox. Now, I'm a little divided on the joysticks, as they do feel great and the capacitive touch for the gyro is really cool, but the wear on the joysticks is a little disappointing. It's happened pretty quickly, but it is cosmetic, so it's not that bad. Now, when it comes to the trackpads, I absolutely love these. You'll mostly use these in desktop mode, but the haptic feedback feels incredible. One minor issue though is if you're in the desktop mode and you exit Steam, then you will lose control of these. So you would have to use the touchscreen to go back into Steam, and then you'll regain access to these trackpads with Steam's controller layout. Talking of the touchscreen, I kind of try to avoid using it as much as possible because I'm one of those people that is a bit OCD with smudges on their screen, but when I have had to touch it, it has been really responsive and easy to use. The built-in speakers on the Steam Deck are also surprisingly responsive and really capable given the size. I've had no problems playing with the audio near maxed out and still retaining the quality without sounding tinny, which won't be surprising, but overall the sound quality sounds spot on. Finally, before we move on to software, I thought I'd quickly mention the rumble. It has it, but it's nothing crazy. At times it can improve usage, but overall it's fairly unresponsive and not quite as good as you would get from a generic gamepad. But to be fair, Valve did actually try and prioritize the haptic feedback from the trackpads instead of the rumble, so I can appreciate that design choice. So, talking about the design as a whole, I think Valve have absolutely knocked it out the park. The Steam Deck is super comfortable to use, the screen is great size, and the 16:10 aspect ratio is really cool for games that support it. It honestly outshines something like the Switch when it comes to ergonomics, but of course that is going to be subjective, but for me, the Steam Deck finds the perfect balance. Moving on to software, I wanted to take the time to highlight the user experience in both the game mode and desktop mode on the Steam Deck. Starting with game mode, if you're anywhere near familiar with how Steam works on desktop as well as big picture mode, navigating the game mode UI is pretty similar and easy to find your way around. In your library, you're able to easily sort games whether it's by all, great on deck, installed and more, or if you're looking for search, then there's a handy search function on the top of the bar. So a big plus for Valve for game management, which is great. My favourite part of the Steam Deck game mode UI though is the Steam shortcut button for easily popping out of games into your Steam environment wherever you need to check downloads, chat with friends and whatnot. But then you can jump straight back into a game with ease. Using the 3 dots button brings up a load of options you can go through, but most notably are your hardware settings, where you can set things like an FPS cap, your screen's refresh rate, as well as managing your power usage and even enabling a Mango HUD on-screen display for things like your CPU, GPU temperatures, FPS, and even a frame time graph, which is extremely useful. Touching upon the refresh rate settings though, as much as I love being able to play at 60Hz, it is actually really cool to be able to drop it down to 40Hz for those more demanding titles and still get a smooth gameplay experience. Overall, the Steam Deck game mode is really accessible, and even if you've never used Steam on a desktop before, Valve have done a great job of making it easy to navigate through for the first time user. Switching gears and taking a look at desktop mode, I find this extremely useful. Your desktop mode is going to be your typical Linux based desktop using SteamOS, where you can do anything you can already do on a typical desktop PC. My main use in desktop mode has mostly been for file management, as where I live my internet speeds absolutely suck, so I rely on a lot of external storage for my games. So typically what I would do is I would actually connect my external drive to my Steam Deck and transfer games manually, and then go back into Steam and install, and it'll then discover the files. If I'm being honest though, unless you need to do something extremely specific, the average user never even really needs to go into desktop mode. Valve has done a great job of optimizing game mode so that the average user doesn't even need to exit out of it, but for power users that are looking for that extra level of customization, it's really handy for that. Now let's get on to power consumption and thermals, because this is where things get really interesting, or worrying depending on the kind of user you are. Now unsurprisingly, battery life is going to vary drastically depending on the games that you actually play. I've played a lot of Hades and Hollow Knight on the deck, and you can pretty much play those games for hours on end, but open up a more demanding title like Red Dead and you're looking at around 25 watts for power consumption, and maybe an hour and a half of battery life at most. Now only you can judge whether that's acceptable, but for me, the kind of games that I'm playing I can play in short bursts for like 30 minutes where I'm on my lunch break in work, or if I'm playing at home I'm usually on the sofa and the charger is within arm's reach anyway. In terms of temperatures, again this will vary from game to game, but on average I would like to say the Steam Deck CPU and GPU tends to sit around the mid to high 80s, which for the cooling limitations is totally fine and well within TJ Maxx. It's really good that the grips don't get hot under load, as all the heat is concentrated in the center and is exhausted out of the top. Just ensure not to block the intake or the exhaust in order to provide adequate airflow. You won't see any problems with performance until 100C, where the Steam Deck will actually begin to throttle, but it's pretty easy to know when you're getting that close, even without your OSD, as you will get a notification to let you know that you're overheating. In my 2 months of using the Steam Deck, this only ever happened once, and that was when I was playing Spider-Man in the middle of a heatwave in the UK, and the ambient temperatures were over 30 degrees C, which is obviously why the internal temperatures would have shot up a little more. Now the cooling is very much reliant on its fan, which if I'm being honest can get a little loud, but you can overcome this with the speakers or just by wearing headphones, or even by limiting FPS or power. Now onto the exciting bit with gaming. This thing is a handheld gaming beast. From the games I played, performance has been what I expected, but there has been some surprises. One of the biggest things that has been really useful in games, and something I use quite a lot in more demanding titles, is FSR, or Fidelity FX Super Resolution. If you're not familiar with FSR, it's basically AMD's open source upscaling technology that allows a game to render at a lower resolution and then upscale the image to native resolution with very minimal visual degradation. Now on a device where every bit of performance counts, it's extremely useful. Over time a lot of games have implemented this and it works really well. So the question I should answer is, what games don't run as well as others? Well, one game that caused significant issues for me was Red Dead Redemption 2. Initially I could only play this game for 30 minutes at most when it would just crash, and at one point even hard froze my Steam Deck and forced me to force reboot. Now very recently they actually patched the game and also introduced FSR support, but the one thing you should ensure if you're trying to run this game is that you're using Proton Experimental, as that seems to be the Proton compatibility layer that is having the most luck with this title. So what I thought I'd do, rather than show you guys just benchmark numbers, was that I would actually directly capture gameplay off the Steam Deck using my capture card, in order to give you guys a bit of a rough idea of the sort of performance in the games that I've played the most on this device. Now bear in mind that the Steam Deck uses a 1280 by 800p display, so of course this is going to be blown up slightly to 1080, which isn't going to look as nice on a larger display, but bear in mind that on a smaller display it still looks great. Just to give you a heads up, but the actual clip should give you a bit of an idea of the sort of performance I've been looking at and how games work on the Steam Deck. Okay, so jumping into one of my most favourite games to play. We're in Fallout 4 currently, and I just thought I'd point out a couple of the stats we can see from playing this game. I'm currently running it at 720p, and we're running it with a 60Hz refresh rate, and using pretty much medium settings across the board, and the game still looks pretty good all things considered. I gotta say, the only drawback playing this game is just playing it without a mouse and keyboard, which I honestly find a little easier for a game like this, if it's like a first-person shooter. But overall, it plays really smoothly. And as you can see, even though we are running at 60 Hz, there are some dips. It does tend to drop down a little bit sometimes, but this game is obviously pretty notorious, especially as you get into the downtown areas, to see some sort of frame drops. So it's nothing pretty unusual for a game like this. But as you can see, this game is using around 25 watts, so it's drawing quite a lot of power. And as you see, we're averaging around the high 80s or so for our CPU, and our GPU is fluctuating a little from the high 70s to the low 80s at times. But overall, this game plays really smoothly, and it's a really good experience. But based on that power consumption, it can drain the battery quite fast, so you're not going to get a massive amount of time to play. We've currently got an estimate of 1 hour and 27 minutes left before we lose battery. Switching things over to a different game I've been playing on the Steam Deck, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a game that runs absolutely flawlessly. And given how good the game looks with its shadow quality and lighting, it's a miracle that this game runs so well on the Steam Deck. And I'm running this basically at max settings with FSR Ultra Quality enabled. And as you can see, our FPS is sticking at a pretty much solid 60 FPS. And from that frame time graph, it's pretty solid as well. And it actually consumes less power than Fallout 4, which is quite interesting, as we're only using about 15 watts currently. It's really quite cool that a game that looks this good can consume such little power. And as you can see from this, you could probably play this for roughly about 2.5 hours based on these performance numbers. Now, given the actual performance we're getting with this at only FSR Ultra Quality, there's probably very little need to even drop it down to quality or performance, given how steady that frame graph is looking right now. So overall, this is a game that plays absolutely beautifully on the Steam Deck. Okay, moving on to something that's a bit more of a demanding title. It's worth noting that the next couple of games that I'm going to showcase on here are actually ones I usually play with a 40Hz refresh rate. Now, my capture card doesn't seem to like to capture at 40Hz, which can be a little annoying. But for now, I've just left it at 60Hz. But you can see roughly where the FPS would usually be at that certain refresh rate. But with 40Hz, it does tend to be much more stable and locked at that rate. But you see, for a game like Days Gone, we're looking at around 40 or so FPS. It does dip a little bit below to like the low 30s at times. But overall, it's a really smooth game, and I'm running it at a mix of medium settings, and I have dropped some to low. But overall, this is a game that plays absolutely amazingly on the Steam Deck. Like I said, with that 40Hz refresh rate, it is much more ideal for this kind of game. But for some more demanding AAA titles, where you can actually afford to drop down to 40Hz and still maintain decent visual fidelity, it can be really useful, not just for making things look more stable, but also for ensuring the battery life does actually last for a little longer. As you can see on here, because we're not capped to 40Hz, we're actually drawing around 25 watts again, much like we were with Fallout. So it would be a good idea for games like this just to drop it down to 40, but overall, this is a game that plays amazingly, and I've been having an absolute blast playing through this game on the Steam Deck exclusively. So currently we're in God of War, and as you can see, we're running this at an FPS limit of 40, just because we can't actually use the 40Hz refresh rate on Steam Deck while I'm capturing. So if I am able to actually cap the FPS, I will mention it when I'm capturing in today's video. And for this, we've actually dropped down to FSR quality just to help with our performance a little bit. And for our actual graphics settings, we've gone with some custom settings, so mostly a mixture of original and low. And overall performance is pretty stable at 40 FPS on here. I have to say, for a game that looks this good, and with the settings we're currently using, the actual performance we're getting in a more intense like boss battle scenario is really good. Now again, we are using a fair bit of power to play a game like this, as we're using around 25 watts, but for something like this, it is going to be expected. So if you look to play a game like this, you would have to bear in mind that you will get a fairly short amount of play time if you're running on just battery alone. And as you see, I'm actually playing this on battery at the moment, only because I can't really do it with the capture card plugged in at the same time. But given the sacrifice in battery life, it's really worth it for what feels like a really smooth gameplay experience. Let's just see if we can kill this guy without actually dying. Let's go. Let's see. Oh, nope, we didn't. Never mind. Now, jumping into a recent title, Spider-Man is a game that actually plays pretty well on the Steam Deck. Unfortunately, I'm not actually able to cap the FPS properly for this one at 40, but as you can see, it can fluctuate quite a lot, so there are sequences where it goes well above 40 FPS, and then it can dip into the 30s. But we're running this with a mixture of medium to low settings again, and currently using FSR quality. Now, I could probably bump up things a little bit more by going for FSR performance or maybe even balanced. But overall, this is another game that runs really well. And like I said, it would be much better to cap this one at 40 just for a smoother experience, as you can see from the frame time graph on the screen. But also one that, again, is quite demanding on our battery life. As you can see, we're currently drawing around 25 watts again, and it's only projecting around 45 minutes of battery life left. So this is a game that will take a considerable amount of horsepower to run for any sustained periods of time, but definitely a really enjoyable experience that translates well from desktop straight over to the Steam Deck. So closing things out with the most demanding title on my device, of course we've got Cyberpunk 2077. Now if I'm being totally honest, this is a game I haven't spent too much time trying to optimize, so I'm just using the Steam Deck preset that Cyberpunk includes. And it gives you a pretty locked 30 FPS most of the time. There are some dips, but overall it's actually fairly smooth. Now this is probably the only exception of a game that I would play at 30 FPS, but given that you want to maintain some eye candy in this game especially, it is good to be able to maintain that visual fidelity and still get a somewhat reasonable frame rate. But come on, we're playing Cyberpunk on a handheld. I never thought I would see the day. Now even though obviously this is running on lower settings compared to what you would on a desktop, the game still looks really good overall. Now even if we get into something a little bit more demanding where say we're actually in some combat scenarios, it still plays somewhat smoothly. Given that when this game first came out you could barely run it on a PlayStation 4, to run it on a device like this is absolutely unreal. Now throwing things back though, I have played some older games that have been a little tricky to get running on the Steam Deck. I'm loving Prince of Persia Warrior Within on this, but you do have to use a launcher prior to getting into the game, and you can't use a D-pad or joystick to navigate the menu, which is a little awkward. Closing things out though, with the title of this video saying that this is the best gaming device in the past 20 years, I really stand by that statement. While it's great being a PC gamer and having the freedom to play games however I want, having the same liberties on a handheld is something I've never quite experienced before. Sure, there are compromises, but they are insignificant compared to the enjoyment I've got out of this device. Not only that, but sometimes you want to be more in the room with people and still be able to play your games, rather than being on a desktop and locked away somewhere in your office. Even that little break in work when I want to play a little bit of Hades has been really nice. But of course, this isn't going to be for everyone, and that's fine. If you can't justify it and it doesn't fit into your daily lifestyle, then you really shouldn't get this device. But if you're like me and a lot of the things that I brought up in today's video appeal exactly to you, then you shouldn't have any problems. Of course, the only thing holding it back is the wait, as it did take me over a year for my Steam Deck to actually arrive. But if you're currently in the reservation queue and are wondering whether it's worth sticking around, I promise you, you won't be disappointed. So, that's it for today's video. Thanks for your patience on this video. I just really wanted to take my time and get as many thoughts as possible on this device before I actually publish my final thoughts. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the Steam Deck, and also, if you have one, what games are you playing on it? If you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to like and subscribe for more videos on the way soon. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at PCJack94. If you'd like to talk more with myself and other like-minded hardware enthusiasts, then make sure to check out the PC Jack Discord. If you'd like to support the channel even further though, then make sure to check out the PC Jack Patreon where you can claim exclusive benefits while helping to fund the FI do on the channel for you guys. You'll find links to all those in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.